It's Science Week, and in tonight's Research Filter, we're going to be talking about some pretty cool discoveries, including one made by a 10-year-old. Also, hopefully, we'll have time for a sticky science experiment. More on that shortly, but first, we welcome scientist, writer and science communicator Dr. Rob Bell. Hello and welcome to RN Drive.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So let's start with some good news. A population of a rare marsupial, native only to a few parts of Queensland, has been found after bushfires in 2019. What's been discovered?
Yeah, so there's these great little creatures called antikynuses, and they're kind of, I suppose, about sort of rat mouse size marsupials. So our marsupials, not rodents, and the particular ones that they had found up around the Gladstone area are the silver-headed antechinus. And the thing is, they only found them in 2013 and identified them as a separate species. And then these bushfires came through in 2019, and they were kind of worried that there mightn't be any of them left, even though we'd just discovered their existence, because they only really were known in 3 patches of rainforest. But thankfully, they went out recently, just a month or 2 ago, and managed to trap 21 of them. So they found that they actually survived post the fires, which was quite unusual.
That's very unusual. How much of its habitat was lost during those fires, and what impact did the loss have?
Yeah, so huge areas were burnt in and around Gladstone, and lots of rainforest, thousands of hectares, in fact. And as a result, there were 20 mammals sort of named on a list by the Australian government that needed urgent management post these bushfires, and they were certainly one of these creatures, the silvered antechinus. So that's why they were out looking for them, to see if they could find any, and finding 21 was just probably, I suspect, more than they had bargained for, but it's great.
Now, this animal has been described as a suicidal reproducer. Can you delicately explain why that is?
Yes, the antechinus in general has an unusual life cycle, and they have an interesting mating ritual, much like, lots of things in the animal kingdom, but theirs is particularly strange, I suppose. The males in particular, males don't live till they're 1. They get bigger than the females, and then when it becomes mating season, they kind of just go a bit bananas. Essentially, their whole body gets flooded with corticosteroids, and for a 2-week period, it's kind of just a frenzy for the males. They're off and about. Mating can last up to 12 hours. Litters can have multiple fathers when they end up being born. But the males themselves essentially don't do anything else. They forget about eating. They forget about life in general. And as a result of these corticosteroids in their blood, their whole immune system, their gastrointestinal tract, it all just sort of shuts down. And unfortunately, they die. They
go crazy reproducing.
Oh, absolutely crazy. Yep.
And then, pass out, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. They've got a 2-week mating frenzy where
it's quite an extraordinary story.
They pretty much shag themselves to death. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. I could stay on that all night, but I've got to move on. Our next science story, and a US lab is on the precipice of a major nuclear energy breakthrough, ignition. What is it, and why is this a significant breakthrough?
So yeah, this did come out of the US, a place called the National Ignition Facility, which is quite a cool sounding place. Now, the nuclear energy that they're looking at there is fusion, not fission. So it's not the traditional, when I say traditional, the stuff that's in nuclear power plants all around the world and in The Simpsons and all of the rest of it, where they take uranium and kind of smash it apart and all the energy comes out. So that's fission, and that's something we can harness at the moment in nuclear power plants. What they're researching is the other one, fusion. So the stuff that happens inside the sun, where 2 small atoms, like 2 hydrogens, are put together and squeezed together under enormous pressure and temperature to produce something like a helium, and energy is released from that. So the great thing about fusion is you could provide us, if we can harness it, with loads and loads of clean energy. Now, what they've done at the National Ignition Facility is that they're going for this point of ignition where they get more energy out than they put in.
Okay, realistically, how far away are they from achieving their ultimate goal?
Yeah, look, there's a saying around in fusion research that a commercial fusion reactor is about 30 years away, and always has been and always will be, which is probably a little bit cruel, but where they're at is very much lab stage. So what they've done is pretty cool in that they've got this tiny peppercorn size sort of bit of deuterium and tritium, which is like heavy hydrogen. They've blasted it with 92 high energy laser beams, made some ridiculously hot, like 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, hot in the center of the sun conditions to hope to kickstart the reaction there. And so what they managed to do was get 70% of the way to this ignition point, which doesn't sound maybe that significant, but it was sort of 25 times better than their previous result. It is all still lab scale stuff they're doing though. So it's certainly a significant step along the way, and fusion is an amazing goal to be heading towards. But I think it's going to be a few years yet before we get onto the sort of real commercial stage stuff. And there's two ways of doing fusion. This is one, this sort of laser beam inertial confinement stuff. The other one that people might have heard of uses huge magnetic field to sort of contain a really hot plasma. And there's a lot of that going on in Europe.
Okay, our next story proves you don't have to be an adult to publish your own scientific paper. Tell us about the 10-year-old from Perth.
Yes, thankfully, not trying to do fusion in the basement, but a very keen environmentalist. It was basically a father and son team doing snorkeling off a beach in Perth. They were keen snorkelers, and 10-year-old Rian Samawira was really fascinated. So he used to go snorkeling a lot with his dad, and apparently was really got fascinated with the Western Australian common octopus. Now, I share his passion for the cephalopods and the octopuses and all of the rest of it. So he used to follow them around whenever he saw them, and he noticed they would often hang out with the brown spotted wrasse fish. He thought, that's unusual. So he said to his dad, have you noticed that? And Dad was like, well, coincidentally, his dad actually studies animal behaviour for a living, so this helped. And his dad's like, I don't think that's right. But then he said, we'll go and have a look. And they ended up spending the next year or so watching and recording across lots of different reefs around Perth. And they basically verified it. Yeah, the wrasse does follow the octopus around and is actually taking after the octopus's hard work to get a feed and having a bit of a feed off the back of it all. So the octopus does all the hard work, reaching in and grabbing things out of crevices with the arms, and the wrasse just sort of picks up all of the scraps.
Incredible. All right. This week is Science Week, as we've said a lot, because people should know that. And Rob, you've been conducting a pretty fun, if not sticky and messy experiment with schools. What's happening?
It is an enormous amount of fun. It's called the Great Big Watermelon Experiment. And essentially it involves a whole lot of schools from around Australia. So at last count, I think we had over 300 schools around Australia, which is pretty remarkable given the amount of lockdowns happening everywhere. And what they're all doing is they're participating in this experiment, which is to try and find out how many rubber bands it takes to implode a watermelon. So it's a pretty simple concept. You take a watermelon and you start adding size 64 rubber bands to it, sort of like a belt around the middle. And when you get to a certain number, the whole thing just goes kabloom, and the rubber bands squeeze in like in an instant, and the whole thing sort of implodes and explodes, and watermelon goes everywhere. So the idea is if they can all participate in this and they can all do 1, 2, 3, however many watermelons they want, and then they feed all of the results back in and we get this huge data bank of results, and we can look at it and hopefully find some patterns, whether it's got to do with the circumference of the watermelon, the rind width, the weight, perhaps even how far it's had to travel from the farm to the school where they're doing it. And look, teachers are even doing these things in lockdown and live streaming to their class as well. So it's really cool. And certainly whilst it's Science Week this week, it's an ongoing kind of thing for the next few weeks. I've said to people, look, if you're in lockdown, you want to do it in a couple of weeks, not a problem. So schools can still register to take part if they want to as well, which is really great. All of the how to do it and the little mini lessons and things like that are all online, so they can sort of follow along.
Do you get to eat the watermelon at the end?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
It's
a zero waste experiment as well. So all of the watermelon, I guess if it falls on the floor or gets splattered somewhere you don't want to, but all of the big chunks that stay on the table, great for afternoon tea or morning tea. And the rubber bands sort of go into a bit of a compact ball, so you can give them a bit of a rinse and pull them apart and use them again.
Oh, everyone's a winner, baby. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Rob Bell has been my guest. He's a scientist and an imploder of watermelons. Stick around after the news. Alexander Downer joins us. It's news time at 7.